The arrival of my triplets was the start of my journey into my love of ecology, because I wanted them to grow up in a world that was rich and vibrant, and I was aware that there was this thing called climate change. It came as a shock to know that there was tipping points, to know that we needed to be zero carbon by 2030, to know that as humans we were ruining the very thing that made our world so beautiful.
I've been interested in the environment from a very early age. I went to the Crystal in London, which is kind of an exhibition of how a sustainable building can be a totally sustainable building. And it talks about the way that our cities should be run in the future. And I remember thinking as a child, well, if these solutions already exist and people are already talking about these things, why do we still have the issues that we do?
Well, the pandemic's had an unprecedented effect on all of our lives, but it's given us the opportunity as we come out of it to change society for the better.
A green and fair recovery includes the need to appreciate the natural world by becoming more connected to it. We are dependent on the world for all that we have, and we cannot continue to take and abuse it in the way that we have been.
During COVID, we have learned to change. We've had to. But we've had to out of fear of death from COVID. Actually, we need to look at what's going on with climate change, because we're in a similar situation. It's just people aren't getting it. They aren't awake to it yet.
Even the medium range scenarios for climate change, they still entail some pretty horrendous scenarios, some pretty horrendous impacts upon us. So I don't like to think about caring about the environment as a matter of some kind of pious virtue. It's simply a matter of self-preservation.
We are around the world seeing people die. We're at the point now where we are one world. And we need to operate as one world, not just one the people of the earth. We're one with nature, because if we're not at one with nature, we have no future. If we continue to burn down the rainforests in the way we are, we will have no lungs. They are the lungs of the earth.
In our soils, there's 80 billion tonnes of carbon. That's the equivalent of 8 years of greenhouse gas emissions from the whole of the UK. But the soils have already lost between 40 and 60% of their potential to store carbon. Systematically, our governments have failed to produce policies to protect wildlife. The number of Britain's most endangered species have more than halved since the 1970s, with 1 in 10 species overall threatened with extinction within our shores. Our farms are no longer places for wildlife because of the pressures being put on them to produce ever cheaper food. The whole way that we manage our farmlands has been detrimental to the flourishing of nature. Farmers need to be helped to take away the intensity of the agricultural systems and go back to a much more natural way of working.
I think what a green recovery from the pandemic looks like for me is a change. I think COVID-19's proved that nature has a resilience of adapting if it's given the chance. We've seen emissions going down because people haven't been travelling to work and have adapted to working from home, and I think we need to seize this opportunity for change.
We need regenerative farming that looks after the land, that doesn't plough, that leaves huge swathes of land, so that nature's got a place to go. So I hope the new Agricultural Act is looking towards a fairer deal for our wildlife, a fairer deal for farmers so that they can support our wildlife. I heard George Monbiot speak at the Friends of the Earth National Conference, and he was the first one who talked about rewilding, and he set the whole conference alight. In his book Feral, he talks about the need for us to rewild the land and ourselves, for us to, as human beings, get back to nature. I'm rewilding my garden. I want to ask schools to rewild some of their green fields.
One of the first things I did when I came into this house was to make brick beds to plant various kinds of shrubs and flowers like the rose and honeysuckle and a big cotoneaster bush. This has made a very enjoyable green space to sit out in the summer months, but also a space for nature. And that's the 4 or 5 families of birds that we have come to nest here, but it's also a habitat particularly for insects. There's been a very significant fall in the number of insects around. Many other kinds of animals and also plants in the ecosystem which are failing because there are not enough insects. So one of the things you can do in a tiny yard like this is to provide little spots for insects.
Well, I think what is key to a greener and fair recovery for Darlington is a re-engagement with nature. To be able to do this, green spaces need to be protected. I was approached in 2018 to help and add some academic weight behind the campaign to save the Blackwell Grange Parkland from future development.
Our campaign has actually drawn together the various interest groups and the two campaign groups that were already operating in the area under one umbrella, and that is no build on the parkland. Adjacent to the parkland here are the Blackwell Meadows. We lost 200 plus trees and ponds and habitats because this site had been sold to developers. And from then, knowing quite well that the parkland was probably next in line, the whole campaign's developed with lots of people and lots of interest groups.
We started to investigate about the history of the parkland and what actually it was meaning to the community.
The trees themselves produce 864 kilograms of oxygen and take in 177,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide a year. And this is the filter for Darlington. The parkland is used by local groups, conservation groups. The Harriers train here, the Darlington Harriers.
And we're delighted to say that the building has been taken off the parkland at present, but it hasn't gone far enough. We're asking that this parkland become a protected local green space, a little bit like a village green. During the lockdown, there were people who didn't have green spaces, didn't have gardens, and they valued coming out into the open air. The most recent research is from Cardiff University. In the first lockdown, the green spaces were used tremendously in the area that they were looking at. In the second lockdown, people were using them less, but were still getting benefit from knowing that the green space existed and that they did have access to it.
The place that I'm stood right now, Skirningham Wood, is being currently threatened by Darlington's local plan. None of the housing that has been proposed for this site has been proposed in a sustainable way, according to the way that we define sustainable. All of these things have been planned in a way that is increasing the amount of roads, increasing the amount of congestion, the amount of traffic.
The demographics of Darlington show that we have a lot more people living in smaller family groups. So we have an ageing population, as for the rest of the UK. So we're more likely to need smaller bungalows and retirement flats, which are not best placed on the edge of town. They're best placed close to existing services, and equally we're having more people living as singles and couples earlier in life, again probably wanting a cheap flat or a small house. We don't seem to have that much development for those sectors at the moment. It's all big family houses, so we need to diversify what we have so that we're meeting the needs of everybody.
I actually grew up on the edge of Skirningham, so this was my childhood playground, which was fantastic, and it learnt me from an early age how important nature and the environment is. I've seen these trees get planted and I've seen them mature. This area is actually a very important green corridor through Darlington. Here where we are at the moment is the only accessible woodland in North Darlington that people can walk to without having to take a car. I've been exploring the place for 50 years and I'd like to think I can continue to explore the place for the rest of my life.
We need to make sure we put homes in the right places.
One of the things we know, and it's been known since the 60s when the theorist Jane Jacobs wrote about it, is that if we build our cities quite compactly at moderate densities or even high densities, there are benefits for our society.
It's more likely that those communities will support a good public transport, good local shops and services, because if everybody is tightly packed and using those shops, then their viability is not a concern because everyone's going to the corner shop. We need to stop urban sprawl into the greenfield sites. We do have a lot of brownfield sites in Darlington. Lingfield Point is a classic brownfield site. It's also more likely if people are close to the town centre that they're able to walk and cycle.
If we move back to the system that we had before, the system of deforestation, of increasing urban development in wild spaces, of unsustainable levels of carbon emissions, we are setting ourselves up for even more crises. All of us have been in isolation for the last year, but we can't afford to be isolated at this time. What we need is collective solidarity.
I found this quote from Caroline Lucas, and I thought it was just a really nice quote to end on. She says, "We can enhance biodiversity and create a better society for everyone if we abandoned outdated, destructive ways of thinking about the economy as being separate from the environment and well-being. And we need to focus more on people's health, their quality of life, and the regeneration of nature."